Hello, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video, we will be talking about the soft palate. Our objectives here are to describe the composition of the soft palate and the neurovascular supply, just like we did for the hard palate. So we'll talk about specifically here, what is a palatine aponeurosis? We will talk about the nerves that provide sensory innervation and the arteries that supply the tissue here. The soft palate is usually described as a musculomucosal fold. Now, what that means in plain English is that it has a center core made up of striated muscle fibers, and then an outer layer of mucous membrane covering each side. Its job is to separate and close off the nasopharynx from the oropharynx. When we're breathing, this passage is open so that air can move from the nasal cavity down to the larynx and into the trachea. When we swallow, that soft palate lifts and closes that passageway off. The hard palate can't do that because it's hard. So having this soft, movable structure allows the pharynx to have a valve to control flow between its parts. The muscles that make up the soft palate have an attachment to the hard palate, but they also have an additional supporting attachment to a structure called the palatine aponeurosis. Now, what an aponeurosis is, remember, is a muscle tendon that is broad and flat. So the palatine aponeurosis is actually the tendon of the Tensor veli palatini muscle, and that travels inferiorly and medially from each side to form a sort of sling that the other palate muscles then can attach to. So here, we've got that Tensor veli palatini muscle on the right side, and let me grab my laser pointer. Here we go. We can see it here, and that is going to extend inferiorly and then kind of make an L turn to project medially into the soft palate here. But there is a lot of soft tissue obscuring how it does this, so let's take a look at the bones in the area first. All right, so here's a nice familiar view of the inferior surface of the hard palate. We've got the maxillary portion up front, and then we've got the palatine bone, its horizontal process, making up the posterior part. When we're talking about the palatine aponeurosis, we're talking about the portion that sticks just posterior to this. So we're going to take a look at these bones sitting posterior as well. This here are a couple of structures called the pterygoid plates of the sphenoid bone. So you have a lateral one that kind of flares out to the side, and here that is over here as well. And then a medial one that runs pretty much in a sagittal plane along the sides of the nasopharynx here. That medial pterygoid plate has a hook on its end. So this is called the pterygoid hamulus. Hamulus just means hook. And you see it here, and then I'll trace your medial pterygoid plate and the hamulus over here as well. That hook is what your Tensor veli palatini muscle will wrap around. So its muscle belly starts off in here, kind of in between these pterygoid plates, and its tendon is going to come up and wrap around and head toward the midline here to meet up with the other half of it from the other side. All right, so we're back at this view, which we've seen a couple of times before, and unfortunately it doesn't ever really get much nicer to look at, but it does give the best demonstration of what I'm talking about here. So what you're looking at is a posterior view of the nasopharynx and then the soft palate, okay? You can see here in the nasopharynx, we have close associations with the pharyngotympanic tubes or the auditory tubes. These lead into your middle ear, and when you kind of pop them open, you equalize the pressure in your ear. So think about like what you do on an airplane. All right, so the musculature here sits very close to those pharyngotympanic tubes, and I'm going to draw your attention specifically here toward the Tensor veli palatini because that was what I was demonstrating this for to begin with. So here's its muscle belly. We're sitting just lateral to that medial pterygoid plate. And as it starts to turn into a tendon, so this is the meaty muscle, here's the tendon down here, it is going to wrap around the pterygoid hamulus and head centrally into the soft palate, okay? So if we look at this on both sides, here it is over here, these are going to make the sling that all of these other muscles are going to attach to. All right, so let's take a look at those muscles in a donor to better understand their relationships. We have 2 muscles that come from above and 2 that come from below to insert on the soft palate. So on the left, you can see the 2 superior palate muscles very well. We've got tensor veli palatini here and levator veli palatini just posterior too. All right. You'll see that both of these have a very close association with that pharyngotympanic tube. I always think that levator veli palatini kind of looks like it's spilling right out of it. It's not. They're just in very close quarters, but that's how it looks. All right. On the right then, we have our inferior palate muscles, and these are going to be muscles that you've sort of seen before, but the last time you saw them, they were covered in mucosa. So we have palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus. And you should recognize these names. These are the muscles that are covered by mucosa and named as the palatoglossal fold and the palatopharyngeal fold. And they mark out the fauces. So palatoglossus marks the end of the oral cavity and the beginning of the oropharynx. And that space in the oropharynx, the fauces, is where that palatine tonsil sits. Okay, so I would like for you to appreciate with all 4 of these muscles how they will act on the structures that they are attached to. Our 2 superior muscles have bony attachments, so when they fire, they do very specific things to the soft palate. They're both going to lift, and tensor veli palatini will also tense that up. These inferior 2 muscles, though, have attachments to other soft tissue structures. So palatoglossus can either lift the tongue or depress the soft palate, and palatopharyngeus similarly can either lift the pharynx or it can depress the soft palate. The last muscle here, the musculus uvuli, is kind of hard to see even in a nice dissection picture like this. So it makes up the little hangy ball thingy at the back of your throat, the uvula. So I just want you to pretend you can actually see the muscle fibers here, and they are going to extend down into the uvula and kind of wrap around so that it's able to change its shape. The neurovascular supply to the soft palate is via the lesser palatine artery and lesser palatine nerve. Fantastic. Both of these are going to make their way to the soft palate following roughly the same pathway that those greater palatine nerves took to the hard palate. All right, the major difference is that they travel here through the lesser palatine foramina and not the greater palatine foramina. So to quickly review here, the lesser palatine nerve is a branch of the maxillary nerve that comes off of the pterygopalatine ganglion. That was sitting in the pterygopalatine fossa, which is roughly right in here. Okay. The branch then is going to travel down through the greater palatine canal, and it will just exit out through this lesser palatine foramen and head back to the soft palate. The lesser palatine artery is a branch of the descending palatine artery. So that descending palatine artery was a branch from the maxillary artery that ran in this canal as well. It had a greater palatine artery branch that came off, went to the posterior and middle hard palate. It also has a lesser palatine artery that's going to come off and go to the soft palate. And that is that. That brings us to the end. So here is your review question. The lesser palatine nerve is a branch of which other nerve? And the correct answer here is C, the maxillary nerve. Greater and lesser palatine nerves both come from the maxillary nerve, and these are both branches that come from the pterygopalatine ganglion. That is the end. Thank you for joining me.